Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I have a spectacular guest with me today, but this one is really, really special. You are
Mm.
absolutely going to be floored by her personal story. She is such an inspiration, and it's such an honor to have her on the show. Her name is Knighton. She is an educator, public speaker, ski instructor, recently a TEDx speaker, host of the Heart Chamber podcast, and Heart Champion for WomenHeart, a national coalition for women with heart disease. She is also an open heart surgery and TBI survivor and thriver. Through her podcast, Boots is able to share stories of open heart surgery and recovery. She is currently working on 3 different books, all related to matters of the heart and how, if we are willing and open, magic unfolds every day in our lives. Boots, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Wow, thank you for that lovely summary. When people reflect back to me what um, I've had the opportunity to experience in my life, it just doesn't feel real some days.
Do you actually even wonder, oh my gosh, who was this person or who is this person? And I can't wait to meet her.
Well, you know what I actually do is I have a picture in my bedroom of me when I was 17,
Mm,
and I look at that often, and that was a really profoundly difficult time in my life. And I tell her often that she's okay. We got through it. And so much excitement was yet to come. And that we
mm,
end up absolutely thriving and being at peace with our life. And it's been such a necessary exercise. And some days I'll look through even other like child pictures of myself and I'll be
mhm,
like, guess what? You are going to go through some really radical things and
mhm,
you're going to end up helping others because of
mhm,
it. So buckle your seatbelt because it's going to
mhm,
be awesome. And that has just been like just such a necessary part of my healing as I've gone
mhm,
through so many different things. Because, like,
mhm,
we all have an inner child in us who definitely didn't come through our childhood
mhm,
unscathed.
mhm,
And so it's like, all these opportunities that you just read back to me about my
mhm.
life, it's like, yeah, all those have been opportunities for me to be like work on my whole self and to be where I'm at today.
That's really funny because I have a picture of myself at 17, and it's actually hanging on the wall on that side of the girl cave. I'm in my basement. And it's a picture of me when yeah, I was a majorette in high school. And the funny thing is, like, why did I even keep this thing? My mother had it framed and all that kind of stuff. And it's there, but it's funny because during the pandemic, when we were all shut down, there I was doing ballet in my basement. So I would do an online ballet thinking, well, how did we ever get here? And I would look at that picture and think, you know what? You go, girl. It has been a rough ride, but
Mhm.
you go, girl. And look at you now. Did you ever think that, okay, I was 17, 50 years later, that I would be in my basement doing ballet?
And of course, you were a majorette.
Of
I mean, of
course. Right.
course. Yeah.
I was head majorette in my senior year.
Well, even more, of course. Like, hello, listeners. Of course, Cheryl was a majorette. I love it.
And that's why I'm so I really take to the ninja sticks when we start working with sticks. It's
Hmm.
almost like a baton. Yeah, we shared a few of those stories earlier. So anyway, start just tell the listeners. I mean, your story is just so incredible of what you've been able to accomplish and heal from. And I think that is such an important part of what I want to convey to the listeners and to let them know that we can heal from anything. And your determination, your grit, your tenacity is just written all over your story.
Where do you want me? I mean, there's so many different places I could begin, but let's let's focus on grit.
Okay.
Um, so in 2014, my best friend was murdered in Nicaragua. And I had no coping skills, none to deal with that. It was unimaginable, obviously. She was missing for many days before they found her and then learned what happened to her, and the helplessness, the hopelessness,
Uh-huh.
the shock, the immediate end of an important person in my life in such a horrible way, was the major turning point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And after it finally got me in front of a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
and what's crazy is, my therapist knew this almost off the bat, but like a year into working with her and processing that and, learning coping skills
Mm-hmm.
to get me through my day,
Mm-hmm.
um, I realized that Karen's death was the least of my problems. And it was Karen's death, it was that catalyst that got me finally dealing with some things I needed to deal with from my childhood and
Mm-hmm.
from my early 20s. And that therapist and I still work together to this day.
Wow.
We'll have 10 years together in May. I always remind her. Because I'm always like, girl, you've stuck with me this long. Anyway, I I realized, I don't know at what point, it was in the first few years I realized that I was my greatest investment,
Mm-hmm.
and that I was not going to let Karen die in vain.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to make my life as beautiful and intentional and meaningful as possible. And that's where it started.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I hit my head in 2018, thankfully I'd already done a lot of leg work of coping, of being able to ask for help. And that's when I first learned about advocating for myself in the medical industry. And it's an
Mm-hmm.
industry.
Oh, yes, it is.
And that's when I really had to learn grit, was like, I'm not okay. I'm not getting the best advice on how to heal from a bad concussion.
Mm-hmm.
And I also went into a really deep depression.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I reminded myself, I am my greatest investment.
Mm-hmm.
And then it happened again, just as I was coming out of the TBI journey in 2020, then my heart makes itself known. And by then I had really, learned how to advocate and navigate the healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was even further along in my own personal journey of true whole self healing through
Mm-hmm.
therapy. And that was a whole nother level of grit. And it was during COVID, and
Yeah.
my mom was dying, and it's just like, we have all these things and that as humans we have to, in deal with in life. And
Mm-hmm.
it really comes down to, through what lens you're looking.
Mm-hmm.
I'm either the victim
Mm-hmm.
or I'm in the driver's seat.
Mm-hmm.
And are we willing to get extra curious
Mm-hmm.
about how this is happening for us?
Mm-hmm. You know, I'm I'm really curious about the heart issue because, with your history of, being so active, ski instructor, you actually worked, I think, as a lift operator for a while,
That was
obviously.
just one season in college. Yeah.
Oh, well, I was still impressed because I
I
know
was one of
that's.
the What's really funny about that was I had moved to Jackson to take a semester off from college, and I and I how I knew about Jackson and the Tetons was I had done a 28-day backpacking trip through the Wind River Range of
Oh,
Wyoming when I was 19. And I had never even hiked, I had never camped. All I had done was walk around the block.
oh
And
my goodness.
I show up in Wyoming, for the National Outdoor Leadership School's 28-day backpacking course. And we marched through the Wind River Range 120 miles in 28 days. And
Okay.
I was like, what do you mean I can't bring my makeup?
Right.
I was
So
like Southern Belle.
this explains an awful lot about your personality and your, your yeah, your attitude. Yeah. I mean, hey, why wouldn't you do that?
Oh, my parents were thinking of so many reasons why.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and that was back before like the internet was really a thing. And
Uh-huh.
so I learned about it from a poster hanging up at, I went to NC State University, and I saw this poster hanging up and I was like, "Oh, I've always wanted to learn how to camp." And and of course it was like 10 miles a day some days, and like climbing mountains and rock climbing. And we were only allowed to bring 4 pairs of socks, 2 pair of underwear, 2 shorts, 2 t-shirts, and 2 sports bras, and that was it. And for 28 days. Yeah. So Southern Belle shows up in Wyoming for that. It was
Okay.
hilarious.
Have you ever seen the movie Private Benjamin with Goldie Hawn?
Oh gosh. It's been so, yes, but it has been so long. I don't remember it.
It is hilarious. I will never forget that movie because it was so funny. I mean, I just laughed the whole time. She was this little princess, and
Oh yeah, I do remember that part. That
yeah,
was me.
ends up in, joining the Army or the Marine Corps, whatever, and, after her husband suddenly dies, and, I mean, the whole thing is so funny because she is definitely the princess, and here she is in boot camp. So, I just, for some reason, thought of that movie when I'm thinking of you doing that hike and what your fellow hikers must have thought.
Well, I was slow. I was
Okay.
really slow, and I thought I was slow because I'm 5 feet tall, and it really was because I had these heart issues that I didn't know anything about until I was 42. So I was 19. I was always last, always out of breath. I just thought that I was also, in my defense, I was carrying like a 45-pound pack on a 100-pound body. I mean, it was insane. Um, and still, I was always at the back of the line, and I had always been at the back of the line. And even though I love mountain biking and skiing, and I climb mountains in the winter to ski and climb mountains in the summer, I mean, everyone just knows we don't get there very fast. And then, when I was 42 years old, we found out why.
Wow. Okay, so how did that present itself?
Well, um, June 26, 2020, uh, my husband Jason and I were walking in the evening, and we're just taking a nice slow saunter up a beautiful canyon near our house in the
Mhm.
Tetons, and my left arm is killing me. And I feel like I have an elephant on my chest. I was
Uh-huh.
nauseous. I was sweating. And I'm a wilderness first responder, so I know better. Um, I don't say a word. We had an incredible amount of stress at that time. Both of our moms had been diagnosed with cancer in the same week,
Ugh.
and it was COVID. And so I just assumed it was stress. So I don't say a
Mhm,
word. We
mhm.
go to bed, all my symptoms go away. I'm like, see, it's just stress. The next day we wake up, we go mountain biking. As soon as we start pedaling, all my symptoms come back. I still have not said a word to him yet. And I'm like barely able to pedal. And we're getting to the top of the climb, and now I'm off my bike and I'm pushing. And I am so nauseous. And now I'm like, okay, something's up with my heart. Like I went through all the symptom check, and
Mhm.
Jason's like, "What's wrong with you?" Because it's like, why am I pushing my bike? And a few weeks prior, I'd actually thrown up on a mountain bike ride while climbing, and I only had been climbing for like 5 minutes at the
Wow.
start of this ride with some girlfriends, and I had to turn around and come home. And so I just thought I was starting to link up some troubling signs, and
Mhm.
so I said to him, I said, I think I'm having a heart attack. And he's like, well, he starts panicking, and he's like, we need to like call 911. Of course, we're in the backcountry mountain biking. And I'm like, I'm finishing my mountain bike ride.
Of course. I would have been surprised if you hadn't.
And we're almost to the top anyway, and I was like, I'm doing the downhill. And we finished the mountain bike ride. We come home and Jason's like, we've got to get to the ER. And I'm like, well, I'm hungry. We need to eat dinner and I need to take a shower. And finally he's like, I call a doctor friend and my doctor friend is like, get to the ER. What are you doing? And, of course I show up in the ER and I'm in the best shape of my life, by the way. I mean, I was like knocking it out of the park, or at least so I thought I was.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I walk into the ER and they look at me and they're like, what are you doing here? What do you mean heart attack symptoms? I mean, they go through the whole workup and they don't find anything, but the ER doc was like, I really think you do need to see a cardiologist because this is concerning. And that's what started the whole thing. But I
Mm-hmm.
just think it's really important. I talked myself out of it. And I have been trained as a wilderness first responder. So I tell that story often because I'm one of the lucky ones who survived that. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of my one of my defects, I still have two others that have not been fixed, but the one that I've had open heart surgery for is for myocardial bridging, and that's what was causing the symptoms. And there have been many athletes who've just dropped dead. I was one of the lucky ones who had all the symptoms and did not die. Like it is it is not lost on me how lucky I
Mm-hmm.
was.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That boggles my mind. And
Oh, me too.
it's terrifying if you can't go down that rabbit hole of the what ifs.
Mhm.
But what an incredible story. So then they did the surgery right then, or
Oh, no. No, 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 no.
uh-oh.
Um, and I go into this really in depth in episodes 1 and 2 of my podcast. Actually, I re-aired it over Christmas in 2023 also.
Mhm.
But it was this long winding road because first things first, the heart is so profoundly complex.
Mhm.
And it takes a minute to get to like a solution. Unless you have like a full-on blockage and you're having an actual like STEMI heart attack.
Mhm.
Usually at that, you have to get the stent in and boom, you're done, right? But most other heart issues, particularly like congenital defects, it does there's usually not this quick path
Mhm.
to a resolution. I'm noticing with all the different people I've had the privilege of interviewing,
Mhm.
and the different support groups I'm a part of and WomenHeart, no one gets to a resolution as quickly as you would think.
Wow.
And so throw in COVID
Wow.
when the world was still shut down. It was an absolute nightmare. So ultimately, July 30th, 2020 was when I had the full picture of my heart, thanks to a CT scan locally here.
Mhm.
And that's when the medical gaslighting really began for me. My cardiologist wouldn't even deliver the news to me. He had his PA call and say I just had anxiety, even though I was already being treated for anxiety successfully. And I mean, I've had anxiety and my symptoms were not like they didn't match, right? Like
Mm.
and so I started and I asked for a referral. He refused. Um, I got on Facebook and typed in my congenital defect, and that's how I found the right support group for myocardial bridging. And that's when I learned that Stanford was the place to go to. Finally, by the end of September, I had referred myself to Stanford. I sent all
Mhm.
my own medical records,
Mhm.
and they got back to me and they're like, you really need surgery, and we can't see you till December. So I literally had to sit still from by mid-August, I was really unable to function. And my husband wheeled me through the airports in December, got me to Stanford. We did all the necessary testing just to prove that like an open heart surgery was the way to go. But then my surgery got canceled last minute because they didn't have any ICU beds.
Oh my
Yeah. I mean, it's such a banana story. But then thanks to Facebook, I found a surgeon who helped me, who did surgery on me 3 weeks later down in Salt Lake. I didn't know about him. There's only like very few surgeons do the unroofing procedure, which is
God.
what you need for myocardial bridging. But it
Hmm.
was really social media that saved my life.
Wow. Like you said, that is a bananas story, but
Mhm.
it makes my blood boil because I know that this stuff goes on. Like I said, I was a medical professional for 40 years, and the medical gaslighting is a real thing. I have even spoken to several guests on my podcast who are MDs who left the medical field because of what goes on and just went into alternative health medicine practices. And they're a lot
Yep.
happier.
Yep. And one of the reasons for my podcast is to help people navigate the healthcare industry, but also almost all the modalities that have helped me thrive
Hmm.
since heart surgery have not been covered by insurance.
What are some of the modalities? I'm just curious, and I'm sure the listeners are too at this point.
Yeah. Well, obviously movement. So I work out at the gym, very focused on post surgery recovery.
Hmm.
Um, then Reiki has been a big one.
Hmm.
Yoga, qigong,
Hmm.
um, therapy that is somewhat covered by insurance, but not
Hmm.
totally.
Hmm.
Um, Acupuncture is probably
Hmm.
the most major one.
Hmm.
I can submit that to insurance now. At first I couldn't. They
Hmm.
don't cover a lot of it still, but at least they cover a little.
Something.
Um,
Hmm.
and then several different supplements were key that, of course, you can't even submit to like on your taxes. And then I went to a retreat. I didn't realize how much I needed to get out of my comfort zone. And it was a container of rest, recharge, and rise, something like that. And it was down in Mexico. And it was, let's see, it was 6 months after my open heart surgery. And I didn't realize, I've always thought retreats were like this fancy pants way to kind of like avoid your life. Like I had a real judgment about retreats.
I see.
And um I I think about that week with all these people I didn't know, um and two guys that were so different from me that were leading the retreat. I mean, different in every way. And it was one of the best weeks of my life.
Hmm.
And I'm starting to think about um hosting a retreat for open heart surgery patients, because I am bringing together like all the healers that have helped
Hmm.
me process and move through,
Hmm.
because I really think I'm doing as well as I am today because I took a week out of my life and gave myself this reprieve
Hmm.
and fed my soul. Because here's the thing, Cheryl, with open heart surgery, when you are cut, I was cut open and exposed. Well, my heart was stopped.
Hmm.
That's major. And then I was open, and call it for, some people might think I have like three heads when I say this, but like when you are open like that,
Hmm.
you are energetically open to all the energy around you in the room in that OR.
Yes, indeed.
And the surgeon touching your actual heart.
Hmm.
I've not met another heart surgery patient who has been like, yeah, I woke up just the same as before. No, like there is, and I'm still like, a shaman has also helped me. Um, Other energy healers have helped me. It's there's like this crazy fundamental soul shift that happens.
Mhm.
So
I'm just
I
I'm just blown away. I mean, it's so funny the way you said it just I wrote it down how what you were doing fed your soul going to that retreat. Another thing
Mhm,
I wanted to say about the retreat, if you host one, you have one of the most beautiful places in the world to host a retreat. There is nothing more peaceful, more healing and more grounding than the mountains.
mhm.
And
That's another reason why I wanna do it.
absolutely, and interestingly enough, I talked to a wonderful, gentleman yesterday who he's now in California, but he grew up in Alberta in the mountains, the Rocky Mountains up, in British Columbia, and he focuses on the soul.
Oh, wow.
And it was like, well, this is really serendipitous or,
Mhm,
synergistic or whatever, because I just had
mhm,
this conversation yesterday, and he was talking a lot about heart and soul
mhm.
and the fiber of our being. So when somebody is invading your true self like that, that is the fiber of your being and your heart and your soul. And I think that people don't realize, even at this advanced, technological age, how much trauma there is when somebody is going into your body, even if it's to heal,
Yeah.
it's still incredibly traumatic.
Mhm,
I was on the other side of the ventilators, by the way, so worked with a lot of open heart patients. And it's very traumatic.
mhm. Yeah, and my surgeon, I just adore him. I wish we lived in the same town and I'd probably pester him all the time because he saved my life. And
Right?
and he was just like, I'm just gonna put your heart's just gonna take a nap. He tried to like make it as as chill as possible. And I'm like, dude, it is not taking a nap. It is
There's
you're like
no
injecting it with stuff. I have a
oh,
list of all the chemicals that they
oh,
put in my body, and it's like font size 8, single space, this long list on a long piece of I'm just like, no wonder it took so long for me to write myself after that. It was
mhm.
so epic.
Yeah,
And my
there's no way to sugarcoat it.
no, and then my mom died 9 weeks later
Oh,
of heart failure. You can't make this stuff up. Yeah.
did you have your therapist on speed dial?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she kinda is
Wow.
anyway.
Fair
'Cause here's
enough.
the thing here's the beautiful thing about, all the work I've done. I'm so not afraid to ask for help anymore.
Mhm,
I deserve to ask for help. You have no idea how long it took me to be able to say that. Because 'cause
mhm,
I'm Southern and,
mhm.
we bless each other's hearts.
Uh-huh, yes, you
We
do.
pray it away on Sunday,
Mhm,
and we eat hush puppies and drink sweet tea.
mhm,
Now, I've lived in the mountains since 1998, but, we can only take but so much of a Southerner out of a Southerner, but
mhm,
I've worked really hard. And I mean, I don't wanna poo-poo the South. I love the South. I love
mhm,
a lot of the traditions, not all of
mhm,
them. But there were some cultural beliefs,
mhm, mhm. Yeah, I
habits.
married a Southerner and, sweetest man in the world. I really love him. Been married now a long time. Oh my gosh, 37 years, but I think we've been together 45. I'm not really sure. Long time. There are
Long
times I
long
really
enough that you're like, "Wait a minute, how long?"
right. And long enough that there are days now that I want to take a baseball bat to his head since he's retired, but I don't do that. And I actually lived in Arkansas for shortly after we were married. I lived in
Mhm,
Arkansas for 19 months one day and 15 hours. So I understand and the South is beautiful. It's wonderful. Wasn't quite for me, especially I'm originally from Pennsylvania,
mhm.
a small steel town in Western Pennsylvania. So they really didn't, think much of this Yankee who invaded their space.
No, no, no,
So,
no, no.
so yeah, it was fun.
Mhm, mhm.
It was fun.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I I I have learned to embrace all that made me me
Hmm.
and choose to look through the lens of, abundance and
Mhm.
grace.
Mhm. You certainly have. I want to ask you then, let's talk about your podcast. What made you decide and when did you decide that you had to have a podcast so you could share your story and help others share theirs?
Mhm, mhm. I was sitting in this very chair with
Mhm.
this the same pile of books behind me.
Mhm.
Um, and I was in a writing mastermind, and
Mm.
I had already written um my first of three books. Um
Jeez.
94,000 words, and I just probably 30,000 are fit for print.
Mhm.
But basically that book, it will actually come out last because no one I do not need to lead with that book. I basically process my mom's death as I was like fighting to live. It's
Oh.
just a crazy story. Anyway, I was working with these two amazing ladies and this amazing group of thought leaders, really.
Mhm.
It was really an absolute honor to be a part of this group. And I've heard of people getting the call, like, in religion, pastors are like, I got the call to like be
Mhm.
a pastor and go to this church. And I've always kind of like scratched my head and I'm like, okay. But with my heart, well, first with hitting my head and then the heart surgery, my intuition has been coming in crystal clear. I've
Mm.
basically been turned into like the spiritual barometer.
Mhm.
Um, and I was sitting in this chair and I swear there was like it was this like as if a spirit I it was undeniable. Something
Mhm.
said you have to start a podcast because
Mhm.
we'd been talking about building our platforms, as an author, it is so hard now as
Mhm.
an author. And I really just have such a strong desire to serve others through
Mhm.
my writing. I really enjoy writing and I
Mhm.
also enjoy speaking. But
Mhm.
here's the hilarious part, Cheryl. I didn't really listen to podcasts. I didn't know about how to run a podcast. It was as if I was struck by lightning. And actually I
Mhm.
have been struck by lightning. So
Mhm.
yeah, and so anyway, like I literally have. And so it was so undeniable. And so that was in early November of 2022, and January 30th, almost a year ago, just over a year ago, I aired my first three episodes. And basically my why of that is I did look for podcasts for open heart surgery patients when I was
Mhm.
facing open heart surgery, and it didn't exist really, from at
Mhm.
least from the point of view that I wanted to come from, which was the
Mhm.
patient's point of view.
Right.
And so I was like, I'm making the podcast that I needed.
Mhm.
And so I did.
So tell me again when it launched, how recently?
January 30th of 2023.
So you just launched. You're
Yep.
brand new.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It
I
is a
did.
huge, huge endeavor.
Yes, thank you. It is. And I did have to take a big break last summer due to some health stuff,
Mhm.
not related to my heart. And so I lost some momentum,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So I'm still
Mhm.
kind of rebuilding all of that.
Mhm.
Because I started going again in October. I joined a lovely startup women's podcast network, and
Mhm.
it's just been everything. And then I was invited to speak on the TEDx stage. I was given
Mhm.
19 days notice
Wow.
in October to speak on November the 4th. And so it's just been like, from 0 to 60. It's been really a lot. Um, but I've been really sitting with it lately at the 1 year mark, knowing that only
Mhm.
10% of podcasts go on past the year mark. And I always want to check in with my soul to make sure that like it really resonates and that it
Mhm.
really is what I want to do.
Mhm.
Um, and like, you read in the Bible that make your yes be yes and your no be no. And I'm
Mhm,
not particularly religious anymore,
mhm,
but I love that sentence. And I think it's
mhm,
so important. And my yes for my podcast has never been bigger and
mhm,
brighter.
mhm,
And I love that we were able to speak about the healthcare industry the way we are, because it's so true. And I
mhm,
really, not only do I want to serve heart patients, but I really want to be one of those that's inspiring change in the healthcare
mhm,
world.
mhm. Because we certainly need it. And I think a lot more people are taking back their empowerment or taking back their personal authority when it does come to healthcare, especially after COVID. That they're doing their research and they're being able to step up and be their own advocate and speak for themselves. It's so important. And I'll always tell people to do their research and to be able to find that to educate themselves and understand their bodies, because the more you understand what's going on with yourself when you do have to seek medical advice, you're armed with your own personal knowledge base and you can say, okay, this is what I'm experiencing. This is what I think it is. This is what I found. If you want to say online, whatever. And if the person's, poo poos you, then you thank them very much and you leave and go find
Yeah.
somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I remind my listeners all the time, we are our own CEOs of our health.
Mhm. Not only that, we are our own experts. And I think that's one thing that when we
Mhm.
are injured, sick, hurt, frightened, we forget about that. We forget about going inside and listening to our bodies and what are the signals that our bodies telling us. We just want to run to somebody to say, fix us, make us better.
Mhm. Mhm. And if I could tell a side story to that,
Sure.
um, December 9th, so just almost 9 weeks ago, I broke my leg
That's
skiing. And here's the thing. So, I had to be rescued. It was quite the event. I tell it in my one of my more recent episodes in my podcast, but um I was, I spent 2 nights in the hospital. Everything was okay, all things considered, right? I had to have surgery and it was just not okay. So I'm sent home after 2 nights and everything is, I'm peeing, I'm pooping, like all the things you have to do.
right.
But at 8 hours into being home, it's bedtime and I can't pee. And my husband and I are like beyond exhausted, right? And I'm on
Yeah.
pain meds and I say to him, huh, I can't pee. And he's like, huh. I mean, we were so in a fog. And so I was like, well, I'll go to bed and maybe I'll wake up in the morning, I'll be fine. I was not fine. 4 in the morning, I get up, I can't pee, and I'm hearing like this throbbing in my ears. It's because the fluid's already backing up. And by 8 in the morning, I'm like, we have to go to the ER. So Jason rushes me back to the ER and they do an emergency Foley on me, a Foley catheter.
Right.
2.2 liters comes out of my bladder, which apparently is like some like world Guinness Book of World Records. And I'm 5 feet tall.
Oh my God.
Um, so and I've put on a tiny bit of weight since heart surgery. I'm
Uh-huh.
like 125-ish. I was
Uh-huh.
145 in the ER. So I'm laying there, they have this cath going, I'm just like fluids just rushing out of me and they can't get my oxygen above 90. And they're about to send me home. They bring the discharge papers in. They're like, wear this catheter. You're going to wear this bag with you at home. Just see a urologist in a few days. And I was like, I have a broken leg with a rod recently placed in it. And I have to deal with a cath bag. Oh my gosh. So I say to them, I'm not feeling right. I'm really dizzy. And so what we didn't know until they started doing more digging, because I asked them to, was I was having a heart attack.
Oh,
Mhm.
and they knew your history.
So here's what happened. Here's what
Shit.
happened. So they almost sent me home with a heart attack. Now, I had no chest pain. I just had dizziness. What was happening was I was drowning internally because since I hadn't peed, The fluid had already backed up around my heart and my
And your
lungs,
lungs.
and it was stressing everything out. The blood work showed my BNP, which is a blood failure marker, was over 5,000. Shouldn't be above 75 for those who aren't familiar. My troponin was elevated, and the EKG, it was not a STEMI heart attack. It was an N-STEMI. So non-S wave. So it's like if you have to have a heart attack, have the one that I had. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it was more of a burp than a heart attack. But here's the thing, I was in Jackson, Wyoming, and because I have a heart history and they don't have a cath lab, they put me on a helicopter to a bigger regional hospital. And when I broke my leg, I was flown out of the mountains via helicopter. So in 4 days, I had 2 helicopter rides. And I bring all this up because here I'm having to advocate for myself this whole way through. As they're rescuing me in the mountains, I have to remind them all. And granted, I've lived here so long, I know most of the rescuers just because
Mm-hmm.
it's a small community. But and so a lot of them already knew that I was a heart patient.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there was so much extra precaution and there was so much extra advocating I had to do, even though I was a 10 out of 10 with my leg is in pain.
Right.
And then the one time I go to the ER, not for my heart, I end up having a heart attack. And it was only because I spoke up and said something's still not right.
Mm-hmm.
And they were totally comfortable with sending me home, even though
Mm-hmm.
I had 20 extra pounds on me
Mm-hmm.
and couldn't breathe.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, I want to highlight that phrase, something isn't right.
Mhm.
And I really want to emphasize for the listeners that not to be intimidated when somebody, says, "Oh no, you're okay, we're going to send you home." You have to have the courage to speak up. And I know it's easy to be intimidated, especially when you're surrounded by all these medical people and the
Mhm.
equipment and the lights and the activity and everything's going on, but you have got to speak up for yourself.
Yep.
And speak up for your loved ones as well. And even practice it. I mean, don't wait until you're in an emergency situation. You can actually role play and say, "Hey, let's pretend this happened. What am I going to say?"
Mhm. Yeah. And I think circling way back to the beginning of like when I said let's start with grit and focus on grit. I mean,
Mhm.
that's it right there because it's like speaking up even though I was exhausted, had just recently broken my leg. That was such a traumatic event and then having to
Mhm.
be flown out of the mountains and then needing surgery and it's like when you're your most tired, you're most vulnerable, um the most like at your wits end and you still say wait a minute, I'm not okay. Like the last thing I wanted to do was go back to the ER, right? Like
Yeah,
I had
right.
just gotten out of the hospital and we were so deflated and
Mhm.
Jason was so traumatized and we were just like in such disbelief that I had just broken my leg and it's just like you still to it's when it's the hardest you still keep going.
Right. That is probably the best description of grit I have ever heard. You just keep going.
Because as far as I can tell, I've not been able to skirt around any of this. You
Right?
can't, you just there's no get out of jail free card. I mean, that
Mhm.
really truly only exists in Monopoly. Like
Mhm.
it is, and I think when we all can just it's called radical acceptance.
Mhm.
And then I first learned it when, I first learned about that concept. It's a
Mhm.
skill, really.
Mhm.
When Karen was murdered, like I had to like really accept that she had died in a violent way in a foreign country.
Ah.
And it took a really long time for me to really understand that because it was
Mhm.
such a departure from the reality in which I choose to live on a daily basis,
Mhm.
right? But I mean, we apply that to anything. Like it was really hard for me to radically accept I needed that my heart had 3 different defects. It took a long time. I would say it took me over a year, like even past my surgery. I mean, it was really a lot to accept.
Actually, that doesn't seem like that long of a time to accept something that huge.
Yeah, maybe not.
Yeah,
But like if think about, for those listening today, like if you're not facing something challenging now,
you will.
awesome, but you
Mhm,
will. And the quicker you can accept that it's actually a thing, that it's happening, believe it or not, the sooner that just frees all this energy up to
mhm,
focus on what really needs to be focused on.
mhm. Well, okay, so Boots, where can people find you? How can they get a hold of you?
Thanks for asking that. Several different ways.
Mhm,
I love hearing from people. Like, I absolutely love hearing from people. Like, if this has been helpful, I wanted to serve your audience. That's why I wanted to come on. I just am here to help and I'm here to offer up different ideas, right? And
mhm,
so I would love to hear from you. You can email me, boots@theheartchamberpodcast.com. I have that's also the website for my podcast,
mhm,
theheartchamberpodcast.com. And I'm wherever you get your podcasts.
mhm,
And then you can follow me on LinkedIn,
mhm,
Suzanne Boots Knighton. And then, oh gosh, Instagram,
mhm.
boots.knighton or the Heart Chamber Podcast. I wish didn't have two different Instagrams. I
I
shouldn't have.
know. I did that
Yeah.
too. Yeah.
Um, and then I'm slowly building a website for my
Mhm,
speaking,
mhm,
bootsknighton.com, although that's not quite live yet. It should be in the next few days. And then my TEDx talk. So the title of my TEDx talk is Practicing Dying for a Living. And that really kind of gets to the meat of life.
okay.
Yeah, it's been really neat to hear from people actually from around the world
Mhm,
who've had the opportunity to watch it. It's
mhm,
I think I really get from what I'm hearing, people are really thinking about their life in a different way now.
mhm.
And that was the whole
Oh,
purpose.
okay, so if I go on YouTube and look it up, I can find the link there and I can put it in the show notes because I
Yeah,
want that
yeah,
to be in the
I'll
show
email
notes.
it to you.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, it's called Practicing Dying for Living. And as far as I can tell, I think I'm the only Boots who has spoken on the TEDx stage.
I'm
So
pretty sure. I would not be surprised, right? Okay, so and now what about the books? Have any of them been published yet?
No, so the first one I'm hoping to publish by the end of this year, Lessons from the Heart Chamber.
Okay.
And so yeah, that's why I'm building a website to just start getting a waiting list. And I'm so excited about it. I actually am putting out like a free journal during this is Heart Month,
Mhm.
February.
Right.
I don't know when you'll air this, but but it will still be available whenever you air this.
Mhm.
I built like this um I think pretty thought-provoking journal
Mhm.
um that's free to all and it's actually kind of the precursor to my book. Um
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, because I would like to have that, so I can put that in the show notes too. Anything that can help us promote you
Oh,
and,
thanks.
share your story and help
I just
other
want to be of
people.
help. I just want to
Yeah,
be of help.
exactly. The more people we can reach, the more people can be helped and
Hmm.
hear that message loud and clear to take care of themselves and be their own advocate. And I think that's the most important thing.
Hmm. And don't forget to laugh. I laugh a lot because
Mhm,
it's so ridiculous.
mhm. Yeah, it is pretty ridiculous. And speaking of ridiculous, I just keep going back to that little Southern belle who's trying to climb that mountain with two pair of underwear and only four pair of socks allowed in her backpack. It's like that would not be acceptable. Where am I going to put my electric curlers? I'm sorry.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was like, what about my deer? I mean, they shut me down on everything I wanted to bring. I mean, and
Bless your
thank
heart.
goodness. Yeah, seriously. And thank goodness they did because that would have really been a lot of weight to carry. I mean, I knew nothing. Like I said, I'd walked around the block.
At least you did that. Boots, thank you so much for being on the show and sharing your story with us. It's been
Oh, this
great.
has been so fun. I've made a new friend.
Yes, you have. You have a friend for life.
Yes,
And let me see, do you have any final pearls of wisdom that you want to leave with the listeners before we sign off?
so many. If you stop peeing, go to the ER.
I love that. That's a perfect place to wrap up. Thanks again for being on the show. You're just absolutely wonderful, and you have touched my heart in such a special way.
Thanks, Cheryl. Same.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. I'm so sorry. I can't stop laughing. Yeah, share this episode with everyone you know, even if they aren't that interested in heart issues. There's a whole lot of information here that can help you with any challenge in life. It doesn't even have to be medical, but please do remember to stand up for yourself and speak for yourself. Be your own advocate and help stand up for your loved ones as well, because there really is a lot of medical gaslighting going on around there. And I really hate to say that, but it's true. And remember that if you don't pee, go to the ER. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.